The alert jerks me from a dreamless sleep at 2:17 a.m., my security app flashing red against the dark like an accusation. Someone is at the greenhouse. I'm in yesterday's jeans before my mind has caught up soil crusted at the knees, keys in my fist, as if they were a weapon. The 11 minutes to my property stretch like taffy, every second, strung with the low hum of the engine and the louder drum of my heart. The headlights catch the gate first. The padlock hangs useless, the metal throat sliced clean through. I leave the car crooked on the gravel, lights pouring forward, as if they could stitch the night back together, and push the gate with a hand that won't stop trembling. Glass crunches under my boots like winter ice giving way. No, I hear myself say, and then again, no, as the beam of light tilts across what used to be order and is now a weather of violence. Hanging baskets spiked to the ground, potted orchids slashed through their crowns, succulents crushed under deliberate bootprints. The Hartwell order, $22,000 of carefully acclimated life, torn to pulp. In the small office, I wake the monitor. The security footage blinks alive, and with it clarity. Tyler. My brother pauses perfectly in frame, raises the garden shears he stole from my tool shed, and looks into the camera like it's a mirror he's been waiting to use. Hatred burns through his eyes, but worse is the patience as he moves methodical as rain. He wants me to know. My knees give, and I sit in the ruin of shards and soil, while 2 hours spool past in ugly certainty. He works in arcs and straight lines, a map of malice. He glances at the lens again and again, checking that the confession is catching every angle. 1 week ago, we were around my parents' dining table. Mom passed mashed potatoes. Dad cleared his throat, the prelude to conversations that always ended with me apologizing for existing outside the family script. Isla honey, Mom began gentle the way gauze is gentle, soft, and thin. Tyler is between jobs again. Your greenhouse would be perfect for him. You're doing so well now. I put my fork down carefully because I have learned to move carefully, because things break easily around my parents, but never in the direction you think they will. I can't afford another employee, I said. And Tyler has no experience. Dad gave a short laugh with sharp edges. He just needs a chance. How hard can it be to water flowers? I bit my tongue so I wouldn't teach him pH balance, root rot, capillary action, climate zoning, so I wouldn't say this is a craft. Family looks out for each other. Mom added her hand, seeking mine, her fingers soft, as if labor were something that lived in other bodies. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. The Hartwell contract is too important. Tyler nodded with a smile that was all teeth. No worries, sis. I get it. The next morning, the texts began. You think you're better than us? Must be nice to be the favorite now. Family means nothing to you. 3 days into the avalanche, I blocked him. My parents called every day with their disappointment, which is the family heirloom passed down polished. I worked 16-hour days instead, moving through the rhythm that keeps me sane. Check the vents, thin the seedlings, log the feedings, breathe, repeat. The night before the delivery, exhausted but proud, I listened to the greenhouse breathe. The Hartwell plants were perfect, tagged, spaced, documented. In my truck bed, I allowed myself a warm cup of coffee and the moon on the rose and 10 quiet minutes. Then the alert, then the gate, the glass, the ruin. I take pictures. I map the damage. I call the police and say the words like I'm balancing them across a river. I have footage identifying the person responsible. Dawn threads soft gold through the broken panes by the time sirens rise thin and then thick. Shock leaves me as if on command, and something steadier hardens in its place. In the station, papers pile like bricks. When I leave clutching copies of reports and case numbers, I turn toward the house I grew up in. The front columns look smaller now, like the trick of a stage set when you stand too close. Mom opens the door in a cardigan she saves for Sundays, even though it's Tuesday. Isla, she says, as if we are in the middle of a lovely afternoon. We weren't expecting I need to talk to everyone I say, Tyler included. Dad doesn't rise from his leather chair. Tyler sprawls on the couch phone, loose in his hand. When I tell them what happened, Mom gasps on cue. My God, did you call the police? I did. I switch the TV to my camera feed. Tyler looks at himself from last night, raises the shears to the lens, makes a mock salute, and then dismantles my work with focus. Mom's hand flies to her mouth. Dad's newspaper crumples. Tyler sits up, schooling his face into something like confusion. I don't know what you're talking about. Turn it off, Dad says after a minute, like he's put a stop to a storm. We can handle this privately, as a family, Mom breathes. Dad reaches for his checkbook as if it were a holy object. The greenhouse is insured. I'll cover your deductible. Tell the police you made a mistake. You don't want this on Tyler's record. I laugh. It comes out spare and sharp. This isn't about money. Then what? Tyler snaps. Punishment, revenge, consequences, I say. A thing you've never met. The word family sits heavy on my tongue, heavy as a key I never asked for. How long have you had a key to my house? I ask. They trade a guilty look that is almost tender. Since you bought it, Dad says. For emergencies? 4 years. 4 years of access without consent. It settles in me a slow, cold weight. I'm not dropping the charges, I say. Dad offers numbers like life preservers. Name your price. Take more. I look at the mantle. The photos tell our myth: Tyler's graduation, Tyler's first car, Tyler's big days. In the corner, my business license in a thin frame. Some things can't be bought off. Later, my phone hums with messages that build a different kind of family, employees willing to testify, a supplier who saw Tyler sneer the banker, who backed my plan, the Hartwell manager, who says, we hired you for integrity. We can wait. It is a new chorus. Tyler's mask slips, and the old boy I grew up with shows his teeth. I'm glad I did it, he shouts. You needed to be knocked down. Even then, even with a confession rusting the air, Mom moves toward him instead of me. I gather the folder, the phone, my name. I will not argue theology with people whose God is the checkbook. I leave the Christmas photo face down on the table and walk out into a heat that feels like freedom. I bought the land 4 years ago with a binder held by duct tape and 3 jobs worth of cash. 27 acres of abandoned subdivision dreams, bad drainage, and good light. The loan officer's cufflinks flashed as he flipped my projections and smirked at my youth, but his pen scratched a number onto paper anyway, and I took it, knowing I'd build the missing half with my hands. Mornings at the coffee shop, afternoons at the hardware store, weekends at the garden center, evenings under headlamps, clearing stumps, and dragging pipe. The first greenhouse rose rib by rib in a wind that tested every bolt. When the pipes burst in a freeze, I replumbed them with numb fingers and a promise to myself. When wholesalers refused credit, I drove 6 hours for trays of seedlings, tucked them into the trucks every corner, and sang to stay awake. Tyler came once in his red Mustang, parked at the edge of the mud, as if dirt could jump. This is what you're killing yourself for? He asked, gesturing at lumber and sky. Looks like nothing. I wiped sweat from my eyes and said, It's not nothing to me. He stopped by the next day with a dinner invitation for a golf buddy's son. Can I said, pouring the foundation. He shook his head, bored with a language that didn't have him in it, and left tire scars across my graded drive. Michael arrived the way good things do, offhand, and then essential. A landscaper with quiet eyes who asked if I wanted a hand with roof beams and didn't flinch when the work lasted past midnight. We drank lukewarm coffee on upturned buckets and talked about windloads like other people talk about music. Winter storms taught me how to sleep listening for seams. Spring taught me how to hear growth. There is a music to irrigation lines when they're right, a soft gasp you feel in your own chest. The first contract was $8,000 for a hotel. I called my parents and got Mom's distracted joy. "Tyler just got a promotion," she said. "We're taking him to Whistler." I hung up and stared at my shipping container office, a metal desk, a calendar, a wall of schedules pinned to plywood like prayers. Outside, thousands of small green things breathed. When the Hartwell contract came, I moved like a metronome through the days, a rhythm of care that sharpened everything. Then, after he shattered, it came the aftermath. The insurance adjuster arrived expecting tears and chaos. I handed him an inventory with timestamps, receipts, replacement costs. He blinked and said, "Most people don't keep records this detailed." "I'm not most people," I answered, and meant it without apology. By afternoon, a small caravan pulled up the coffee shop owner from my first job, a woman who had bought a basil plant from a card table when I was 16, Michael with 2 cups and a face that matched my pace. They didn't say much. They picked glass-sorted salvageable roots and stacked what could be saved. That night, Hartwell called with grace. "We'll adjust the timeline," the project manager said. "Your resilience is why we chose you." I hung up and looked at the wreck and thought resilience is a word that hides a lot of sweat. The court date came 6 weeks later with furniture polish smell and a knot of nerves I ironed flat in the hallway by breathing slow. I wore clean work clothes because they tell the truth. The footage played, and the judge's face did not move while Tyler dismantled my life in looping, well-lit proof. Tyler spoke about stress, misunderstandings, and remorse that never reached the dark of his eyes. My parents sat behind him as if pews had emerged just for their faith in him. The ruling landed clean, full restitution, 200 hours of community service, a no-contact order. Outside the courthouse, the light was aggressive with summer. A different caravan arrived to my property 2 mornings later, security installers with coils of wire, new cameras in mat boxes, a team that listened when I pointed to red X's on a map I had stayed up late to mark. "Most folks just say, 'Secure it,'" the lead tech said admiringly. "I don't do most folks," I said, and we smiled like people who recognize each other's tribe. The insurance check was $18,000, not enough, but it didn't need to be. I slept on a cot in my office again and turned spreadsheets into ladders. Every rung, one more paid invoice, one more salvaged row, one more step away from the night I watched my brother become the worst version of himself. The Chamber of Commerce woman arrived with a gift basket and an envelope, an invitation, and 3 potential clients scribbled on a card. "Your resilience impressed a lot of people," she said, and I didn't know how to hold the tenderness of that. So I put it on a shelf inside and labeled it later. My mother called and called. I let the calls ring into a silence I could live with. When she showed up behind the security trucks and tried to fold the word healing around me, I stood up from a tray of seedlings and said, "When Tyler completes his restitution and honors the order, we can talk. Not before." Saying it made something loosen in my ribs. That night, Tyler's truck idled across the street like a bad memory. I photographed it and sent it to my lawyer without commentary. The next day, 3 one-star reviews appeared brittle and spiteful. I flagged them with the calm a person gets after realizing that weeds are inevitable and pulling them is part of the day. Michael kept showing up with bagels and blueprints. "The new frame arrives Tuesday," he said, and the way he said, "We meant more than lumber." I hired 2 assistants. It felt like admitting I have limits, and also like admitting I have a future that needs more hands than mine. The local business journal ran a piece on the court case, and the Rebuild and Westridge called to say they'd like to award a contract twice the size of Hartwell's. I smiled like the body remembers how, even when the mind has forgotten. I made an extra loan payment and slept 6 hours in a row. When I walked the property with Michael, I saw faces from my parents' country club, watching through the fence all those people who had learned our family story from Christmas letters and brunch nods. They looked uncomfortable, as if the weather had shifted, and they weren't dressed for it. My mother eventually called Michael, and he told her I was making the right decision. He said it like a man who doesn't need credit for decency. At the end of that week, my phone filled with texts from a former seasonal worker asking for a job and a supplier offering credit terms. Community is a word you think belongs to church basements until you're standing in a field next to a half-built greenhouse, and a dozen people you didn't expect show you what it really means. The invitation arrived as a text from Mom, the way catastrophes sometimes arrive as Christmas cards. Family dinner tonight, 7 p.m. Time to make peace. In the small space inside me that still checked for ambushes before opening doors, a siren went off. "You don't have to go," Michael said softly when I called. "If you do, I'm coming with you." We went. The house was staged like our childhood polished brass knocker autumn wreath, dead center china, that only saw light when the script required pretending. Dad stood by his chair with a smile that misfired. The table was set for 5. The 5th walked in carrying a casserole and contrition pressed into his face like makeup. The restraining order said 500 feet. My breath dropped out of habit into the lower register I've learned to use when I need the ground to hear me. "What is this time for everyone to talk like adults?" Dad said. "We're family," Mom added, already smoothing the edges of the word. I didn't sit. "Tyler isn't supposed to be within 500 feet of me," I said. "That's the law." "Exactly what we need to discuss," Dad replied, and it would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. Mom bridged as if she were crossing troubled water with her best voice. "What will the neighbors think? Your grandfather would be heartbroken," Dad finished. Tyler slipped into the space his childhood trained him for. "I'm truly sorry. I was in a bad place. I've been going to classes. I've changed." The words were polished smooth from use and slid off me like rain off new plastic. "What do you want to happen?" I asked. "Once he apologizes, Mom said you could reconsider pressing charges. Your father can cover any remaining damages." "The insurance covered damages," I said. "It's the criminal record that's the problem," Dad explained slowly, as if I lacked a grasp of cause and effect. I opened a folder and laid down the pages like cards on a table in a room where everyone already knew what was printed on them. Photos of Tyler's truck idling outside my greenhouse 4 times last week. A shot of him parked outside my house for 27 minutes yesterday. Screenshots of messages from new numbers after his was blocked. Their faces told me they knew and had been hoping words alone would drag the truth somewhere more comfortable. Amends, I said evenly, would look like respecting the order, getting a job, any job, and paying restitution yourself. It would look like changed behavior, not better speeches. Tyler's face twisted, and the boy who broke my science project and never had to fix it came roaring up through a grown man. "You've always thought you're better than us," he spat. Dad reached for his wallet as if it could be used to put out a fire. "I'll write a check, whatever amount, just put this behind us." "This isn't about money," I said again, because the line between us has always been drawn across that sentence. Mom stared at me as if I had spoken a language she didn't know. "Family is above all," she whispered. "No," I said quietly so it would land. "Respect is above all. Consequences are necessary. Look at what your stubbornness causes." Dad said, gesturing at Tyler as if I had conjured him. "If you would just forgive and forget." "Like you taught him to?" I asked gently, so he has never had to look directly at himself. The question hit something in the room. I felt the shiver of it in my bones. Mom flinched, as if the air had been slapped. Dad looked down at his hands, empty for once. Tyler, failing to contain the rage, called me a name I've been called before in whispers and arguments. He meant to wound. He only sharpened my certainty. We left to the sound of chairs shifting and breath catching, to the surprising peace of a sky that didn't care about scene changes, to Michael's steady hand finding the small of my back, as if it had always known the way. "You okay?" he asked when the house was a small geometry in the rearview mirror. Yes, I said, and felt the truth of it settle like a stone in a lake, quiet but sure. The rebuilt greenhouse rose from the bones of the first like something evolution would be proud of. Skylights poured angled morning into a space larger than the one before, vents, humming irrigation, whispering rows of orchids arching like chandeliers. I hired Elaine, who arrived with a clipboard and a teacher's patience, and watched relief soften into pride, as delegating turned out not to be the same as surrender. The Martin account needed my signature at 7:30 a.m. The herbs for Chef Anthony needed a small adjustment to the drip. The team needed a 5-minute huddle and a joke at the end. In my small office, I paused in front of the framed business plan edges, yellowing handwriting fierce, and grinned at the email from the banker, who used to correct my math as if his pen knew more than my grit. We refinanced at a rate teenage me would have used as a dare. Michael texted dinner tonight, something special planned. The warmth that ran through me was not from the skylights. Therapy taught me that family ties and family bonds are not synonyms, that the former can hold you like a rope, and the latter can hold you like a hand. I talked about Tyler without shaking, which felt like a language lesson in a dialect that didn't require pain for fluency. Mom pulled up mid-morning in her silver sedan, clutching a small terracotta pot with a nursery tag still tied to it. "We have coffee sometimes now, careful and bounded." She observes the perimeter. I have drawn a new choreography. Dad doesn't come. He is waiting for an apology I will not give for saving my own life. Tyler finished his community service with the stiff precision of someone marking boxes and applied to a garden center across town, listing experience he never had. The owner called me. I told the truth. Healing does not require me to lie, so he can keep pretending. The team grew, and so did the orders. The client whose plants died under Tyler's shears doubled down on us because we handled adversity with our heads up. Westridge inked and then renewed. Security cameras blinked steadily, small glass eyes that promised proof if anyone came to test the new fences. I walked the perimeter at dusk and caught the faces from the club again, less curious now, more respectful, or maybe just careful. Michael walked beside me, nervous energy coiled under his quiet. Under the arbor of climbing roses I had coaxed from cuttings, he dropped to a knee with a question that felt like sunlight landing. I said yes in a breath that stretched all the way back to the first true leaf I ever watched unfurl in a plastic cup. We celebrated with the crew in a tangle of long tables between rows of fern and rosemary laughter snagging in the rafters. I looked up at the new sign, Flora's Family Greenhouse, and felt its letters rearrange inside me. Family, I realized, is the one you build, not merely the one you inherit. By the time autumn laid a quiet gold over the hills, the greenhouse had become its own weather system of steadiness. I woke before the sun, without dread not to check cameras, but to walk the aisles and listen to the plant rooms breathe. The new expansion paid for with 3 contracts and a refinancing I could not have dreamed of when I was 22, and duct taping a binder held humidity like a promise. We staggered deliveries to avoid overtime, trained the 2 new assistants Michael had helped me interview, and tuned our schedules to the cadence of growth. The rhythms felt like music check, pH adjust, nutrient mix, rotate trays, mentor Elaine into making the calls. I once hoarded answer 3 community emails that had nothing to do with plants and everything to do with roots. On a Tuesday, Catherine from the Business Association stopped by with a wedding gift and a request to speak at a small business resiliency panel. I said yes, then wrote a talk that refused to turn suffering into spectacle, and instead translated my checklists into a set of principles that any craft could wear. That night, Michael and I ate dinner on the tailgate again, just like the night before the Hartwell deadline, Only now the tailgate sat in a driveway that led to something we had built together. Mom sent a photo of her terracotta plant still living, still awkward in its cheap pot, and a message that said, "Learning and I let it land," without adding finally. Progress is slow work, like pruning a stubborn rose cut. Wait, watch, try again. Dad's silence grew a different root system I had no obligation to water. Tyler posted photos that were equal parts bravado and boredom, then disappeared from the feeds of people who had once curated him like a lawn. When he drove past my property again on a Wednesday, I logged the time, forwarded the image to my lawyer, and went back to repotting a fern. Emotions used to rip me from my day. Boundaries returned me to it. On the anniversary of the destruction, the team surprised me with a morning toast. To what grew back better, Elaine said, and everyone knocked ceramic mugs together. I looked across the glass room and saw our first basil customer laughing next to the security tech, who had become a friend next to the coffee shop owner who still brings leftover bagels on Thursdays next to Michael, who knows when to speak and when to stand solid beside me. I thought about the lima bean my science teacher handed us at 14, how mine sprouted first, and earned me a shrug from the boy who would one day slash orchids, and I felt the emotions slide into place without burning. The past does not evaporate, it composts. Used right, it feeds the future. We installed a small plaque on the rebuilt foundation that afternoon, a slim line of words that told the truth without explaining to those who didn't need to know, from ruin roots. A week later, Mom asked if she could join our Saturday volunteer day, planting a community garden by the library. I said yes with guardrails and watched her kneel in jeans she didn't mind dirtying. Watched her ask Elaine about perlite and listen to the answer. Watched her hand a small trowel to a little boy who kept calling Rosemary Rosemary like it was a holiday. She looked up once and caught my eye, and for a second, the years thinned. "Thank you," she mouthed. It felt not like forgiveness, but like a step. The Hartwell manager visited to see the new space, touched the sturdy frame, and said with a grin, "Your integrity is still why we hire you." I walked her through the propagation tables, and it felt like walking someone down a hallway of photographs that were alive. That evening, Michael and I sat on the office stoop with ringed fingers and bare feet. "What would you tell your 14-year-old self?" he asked. I listened to the irrigation sigh, to the nightbirds tuning up to my own pulse, a steady thing. "Keep the coffee, Ken," I said, "but also ask for help sooner." He nodded, as if I had given him a tool he needed. We wrote vows that didn't promise never to struggle. That's a lie. Plants won't let you keep, but promise to choose generosity and repair over pride and silence. On our wedding day, we said them under the arbor, where he had proposed, roses threading the air with sweetness. People who had pulled glass and hauled lumber cheered as if we had all won something together. Mom stood near the back in a simple dress, crying in a way that felt like earning. An empty chair with a name card no one sat in was Dad's choice. I let the wind claim it. When the music quieted, I spoke into a microphone that had held fundraising speeches and toasts to other people's children. Family, I said, isn't the absence of harm. It's the presence of accountability, respect, and care. You can choose it and build it. You can refuse what breaks you and invite what grows you. Later, when the greenhouse fell back into its nightly hush, I walked the aisles alone and rested my hand on the new sign. Flores Family Greenhouse. The name had shifted from ownership to belonging, from inherited duty to chosen bond. The lesson that had taken me a year and my brother's worst night to learn lay clear as water. You cannot harvest peace from a field sown with appeasement. You choose boundaries as trellises, and then the life you are building has something strong to climb. Thank you for being here for my story. If it moved you, please like, share, subscribe for more true life dramas, and tell me in the comments what part resonated most with you.